You know, there are these moments in history that are so incredible they almost feel like myths. But behind every legend, there's usually a story that's even more fascinating. A story about strategy, unbelievable risk, and deep sacrifice. Today, we're diving into one of those moments, the battle for a single fortress that would go on to shape the destiny of an empire. This is the real story of Sinhagad. That brings us to this famous and really telling quote from the Maratha ruler Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. He said this right after he heard the news of a massive victory, and it just perfectly captures what this story is all about. A win so important, yet so painful, that it was mourned just as much as it was celebrated. See, the thing is, taking this one fort wasn't just about winning a battle. It was a huge psychological blow to the enemy. A turning point that basically reignited a rebellion and put the mighty Mughal Empire on notice. So let's dive in and see how this all went down. To really get why this one battle was such a big deal, we need to rewind a bit to the middle of the 17th century. At the time, the young Maratha state was really on its back foot, kind of pushed into a corner by the massive, powerful Mughal Empire. This treaty, wow, it was a crippling blow. Shivaji Maharaj had to hand over 23 of his most important strongholds, and among them was the fortress of Kondhana. For the Marathas, getting these forts back wasn't just a military move. It was about survival. It was about honor. And Kondhana, well, it was the crown jewel of them all. We're talking about a fortress perched over 1,300 meters high. Its cliffs were so steep that a direct attack just seemed, well, suicidal. This thing wasn't just a fort. It was a symbol of Mughal power, sitting untouchable in the sky. And Kondhana was important for so many reasons. It controlled the whole region, it watched over the city of Pune like a sentinel, and, as if that wasn't enough, it was commanded by a top-tier Rajput officer named Udaybhan Rathod. So, by any normal military playbook, taking this place was just impossible. But here's the thing, the Marathas weren't thinking about a normal attack. The man in charge of this mission, Tanaji Malusare, came up with a plan that was as daring as it was brilliant. A plan that's a perfect example of what we call asymmetric warfare. So what is asymmetric warfare? It's pretty simple, really. When you're the underdog, when you're outnumbered and outgunned, you don't play by the enemy's rules. You change the game completely. You have to fight smarter, using things like surprise and the terrain itself as your biggest weapons. Tanaji's plan was to hit Kondhana where it felt the safest. There was this one cliff, the Danagiri Cliff, that was so steep, so treacherous, that the defenders just assumed no one would be crazy enough to even try to climb it. And that assumption? That was the real weakness Tanaji was going to exploit. Okay, but that leads to the million-dollar question, right? How on earth do you get 300 soldiers up a sheer vertical cliff in the pitch black of night? Well, this is where the story gets really interesting, where history and folklore start to blur. Historians have argued about this for ages. So you've got a few schools of thought. Some say they literally used a trained monitor lizard, a gore pad, to get the first rope up. Others think gore pad was just the local slang for a special kind of grappling hook. And then there's the idea that it's all a metaphor for how these warriors were just masters of their terrain. Whatever the truth is, it worked. They made it to the top. All right, so they're in. The first group makes it up the cliff, takes out the sentries without a sound, and yanks open the Kalan gate. That lets the rest of the Maratha force pour into the fortress, and just like that, in the dead of night, the fight for Kondhana was on. And what happened next was this incredible clash of styles. On one side, you have the heavily armored Mughal and Rajput soldiers, trained for formal, defensive fighting. And on the other, you've got these light, agile Maratha warriors who were absolute masters of surprise and guerrilla combat. In the dark, inside the fort, agility and surprise won the day. The chaos of the battle finally boiled down to one single epic moment, a showdown between the two commanders. Tanaji Malusare and Udaybhan Rathod, two absolute titans of warfare, met in single combat. It was a furious duel, and in the end, both men fell, mortally wounded. It was a tragic end for both leaders. With their leader gone, the Maratha attack started to lose steam. You can just imagine the panic setting in. But then, Tanaji's brother, Sordi, something absolutely ruthless and brilliant. He ran to the cliff and cut the ropes they had used to climb up, completely cutting off their only escape route. The message was crystal clear: win this fort or die right here. It was a true do-or-die moment that fired up the soldiers and turned the battle for good. So the Marathas took the fort. They won. But the cost? It was just staggering. Losing Tanaji, who was one of Shivaji's best friends and most trusted generals, was a devastating blow. And yet, that incredible sacrifice would become legendary. To honor him, to honor that lion-like courage, Shivaji renamed the fort. Kondhana became Sinhagad, which means the Lion's Fort. And that name cemented Tanaji's legacy forever, turning him into a symbol of the entire Maratha cause. And this is where you see the real genius of it all. The victory at Sinhagad wasn't just one win. It was the first domino to fall. It completely shattered the idea that the Mughals were invincible. Fired up by this impossible victory, the Marathas went on a tear. One by one, the forts that had been lost for years started falling back into their hands. And what the Marathas did here, it's not a one-off in military history. In fact, it fits into this classic pattern. You see it with the Romans at Masada, the British in Quebec. History is full of these stories where a clever commander wins by taking the one path their enemy thought was completely impossible. Which brings us to the core lesson here, a lesson that's true for any conflict, really. Your defenses are only ever as strong as your assumption that your opponent is going to play by the rules. By choosing to do the irrational thing, by climbing an unscalable cliff in the dark, Tanaji Malusare totally rewrote the rules of the battle. So when you ask, why does this one battle from centuries ago still matter? Here's why. It was so much more than just a military win. It was the spark that reignited a revolution. It created a hero, a martyr, and it was the strategic turning point that put the Marathas on a path from being a small regional resistance to becoming a powerful empire. And that really leaves us with something to think about. The story of Sinhagad is a powerful reminder that history isn't always written by the biggest armies or the strongest walls. Sometimes, the entire course of history is changed by a small group of people who just have the courage to believe that the impossible is worth trying.